Hello again, this is Dr. Lee, and this is a discussion about sources of student diversity for EDS 318. And we are continuing, this is part 2 of the talk, and we're continuing on the second page of the handout. This is found in the shared document section of our course website. It's called Sources of Student Diversity. So let's keep going on the area of gender, an obvious one. And obvious, but then again, sometimes not so obvious. And research has shown that males and females are different, no surprise there, and that we also approach learning in different ways. In the classroom, females, researchers have found, generally tend to be more extroverted, but also more anxious, more trusting of their teachers and fellow students, less assertive, probably have a slightly lower self-esteem, and that their verbal and motor skills develop faster than verbal and motor skills of boys. And you might right away say, wait a second, that doesn't describe me, or you don't agree, but in general, I think these could be viewed as characteristics of males and females. And there are also some differences as far as career preparation, colleges, the way that some might go about education, and also the choice of their careers. So when we think about implications, again, the right-hand column here is where you should fill in some information that I say or some of your own thoughts or ideas. But when we think about these implications, first, certainly, we need to recognize that genetics and the environment certainly play a role in the classroom. We need to be careful of our own expectations and preconceived notions that we might have of males or females in the classroom. And we need to challenge those preconceived notions. Our expectations should be gender neutral. We shouldn't expect the girls to do more or less of this or that, or the boys more or less. And let's not be stereotypical, but have the same high expectations of all of our students. We also should be mindful to provide appropriate role models, a variety of role models. Show that in various careers that males have been successful and females have been successful, if that's appropriate, if that's true. And then another important thing to emphasize, not just in the gender area, this applies to many of the areas we're talking about, but we should be careful to teach students that their academic achievement is often a result of their effort. That is the main thing. They put in effort and then they get more academic achievement as a result. And we need to specifically teach them that because many students assume that it's who they are and their circumstances and their environment, and those things determine their academic achievement. And that would lead to students saying, well, I'm just a girl, so I can't go into that field. Or, it doesn't matter how hard I work. Or, I came from a poor family, so I'm never going to be able to blank. No, instead we should say, your effort determines what you can achieve. And if you want to break out of that poverty, you can. If you want to break out of those stereotypes that other people might have for you, you can. And so we should be mindful of that and try to encourage students in their effort related to their academic achievement. Moving on to the area of language. This is a real area, depending on what classroom setting you might end up in. You may have students who are learning English, who know some or a lot of English. And in public schools in our country, 1 in 9 of the students, 5 million, have limited English proficiency. So this is a big deal. And again, depending on what situation you are in, you may have to face the reality that some of your students do not speak English. So let's talk about some things some implications, things that research have found to be important for that. One thing is that instruction in a student's primary language does help their academic achievement. Now, right away you might say, wait a second, I don't speak Chinese, so how can I help my student who speaks Chinese? Well, you're right. If you don't know Chinese, you can't help them. However, there may be other resources in the family or in the school setting, and there may be ways that you can partner with other people to help this student. Here's an example. If you have a Chinese student and you are teaching the American Revolution, Well, the rest of your students probably have quite a bit of background on it and they're ready to dive into it. But that Chinese student may be lacking tons of background information. And there's a lot that they need to catch up on, and it may be difficult for them to understand. So think about the value of setting them up in a situation with someone who speaks Chinese and can talk them through what led up to the American Revolution. Give them a summary of the wars of the American Revolution. Those things can really help that student to get up to speed, and then also they can learn it better. So you may allow them to listen to things on websites that are in their language about what you're studying, because that can help them learn better. There also is a benefit for students with limited English proficiency from just plain good teaching. When you teach them well, in other words, you have a learning objective and you've shared that, a learning goal, you assess them well, you assess properly, you have systematic teaching, it's clear, that is definitely a benefit to them. Another thing is that these students will require accommodations. So you're going to need to do things not watering down, not making things simpler, but allowing them to use certain materials, for example, that help them in their native language, or using assessments where sometimes they're assessed in their native language so you know for sure what they have learned or not learned. And again, these things might be much more challenging, obviously, than I'm making it sound. However, you may have some resources available to you in your school setting, and again, through the student's family, that could help these students achieve. And one final thing about students who are English language learners is they need to feel your support. What they don't need to feel is you thinking, oh, this is so much work. How am I going to do this? And you kind of backing away and them feeling like they're a burden to you. So they need to feel that you are supportive of them, that you're glad you are their teacher, and that you will do whatever you can to help them succeed. Next, let's go on to talk about cultural diversity. And this is an area that is really fascinating to me because I married into a Taiwanese Chinese family. My husband grew up in Taiwan and came to the States to attend college when he was, I believe, 21 or 22. And because of that, I have run into a lot of cultural differences, and I'm fascinated by this area. And I have seen that it certainly has an impact on education and on the classroom. So we need to recognize that different cultures have different attitudes, beliefs, and rules that define them. And many times we're unaware. I know that I certainly was unaware of many of the differences in culture between my husband and I, or I thought, oh, this is no big deal, we can handle it. But along the way, there are many things that come up that actually take more than you think to work through. So we need to recognize those things, and that we're probably not very aware of some of those attitudes and beliefs of other cultures, and possibly not even of our own cultures. Our goal would be two things: to have a culturally responsive teaching. That's a type of teaching that acknowledges cultural diversity. It doesn't just make everybody seem like the same and force everybody to do things a certain way, or assume that a certain culture is the best one and so we should all do it that way. And we also want a culturally relevant classroom. And this is where culture is seen as a source of strength. Different cultures is viewed as a good thing. You are Hispanic, that is a good thing. You are Chinese, that's great, that's interesting, that's fascinating. Not as a problem, not as something to be overcome or changed, but culture is something that can be embraced. Let me give you an example of this just from my life. When my husband and I were planning our wedding, he had never been to an American wedding before, so I was describing to him specifically the reception and what that's like. And I was describing the head table, you have the bride and the groom, the bridesmaids and all that. And he asked, where are our parents sitting? And I said, oh, well, down with everybody else who's attended, close to the front, right at the front, we have a parents' table, one for your family, one for my family. And he got kind of confused, and he said, so wait a second, our friends in the wedding, our bridesmaids, they sit up with us, and our parents sit down there? And I said, yeah, didn't even think about it. And he was very uncomfortable with that because in his culture, especially at a family wedding, a big event like that, parents are to be respected and honored. And I would mentally, I would agree with that, sure. And it's not disrespectful to me to have my parents at a table with family members and not at the head table. But for his culture, it is. And it was very important to him that it's parents that are up at the head table with us. And so that's what we did. Our wedding was a bit different in that regard. But that's an example of, one of the almost 1,000 things that we have come into in our marriage of different beliefs in different cultures. And it can be very easy for me to think, oh, that's silly, or to not understand something and to just assume that my way is a better way of doing things. And I have had to learn that that's not true. That there is a lot of value, even if I don't end up changing my beliefs in something or changing the way I do something, to at least respect and appreciate the beliefs of another culture. So as far as some implications here, recognize that people from a minority population, they want their culture to be recognized as unique and to be preserved for their children. It shouldn't be something that, more and more and more we're going to become less and less Chinese while we're here. No, they still want to maintain their culture and preserve it. Another thing that as a teacher we should do is to build on their cultural backgrounds, to find out what their prior knowledge is. They may have less, they may have a lot more prior knowledge about the topic that we're teaching. And then to select appropriate materials based on that prior knowledge. And also to learn about the cultures yourself, to take the time to want to know them, to want to know about them, and let them know that's part of that support that we talked about in the language section before. It really says, I care about you and I'm interested in who you are as a person, and I want to use that in our classroom. And more than anything, treat them as individuals first. Don't just look at that culture and think of all those differences or the uniqueness of that culture. First, view them as an individual. And they have unique needs just like everybody else in a culture you might expect. They have unique needs and are a unique student. So that's cultural diversity, and we're going to stop there after gender, language, and cultural diversity and end this video and continue on a part 3.